Britain rebuilt itself in the 1950s, and some luxury car makers charged Rolls-Royce money for considerably less than Rolls-Royce engineering. Not bad cars. Just expensive lessons. Stay for number 1. It wore the right badge and charged the wrong price. Subscribe now, this list only gets pricier. This is the countdown. Number 10. Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire 346, 1953. A car built by an aircraft company, priced like 1-2. The Armstrong Siddeley Sapphire 346 launched in 1953 from Armstrong Siddeley of Coventry, a 6-cylinder saloon built by a firm better known for aero engines and propellers than for motorcars. Its 3.4-liter straight-six engine produced 150 brake horsepower, and road tests of the period recorded a top speed of approximately 100 miles per hour, respectable for a car of its size and weight. The Sapphire was engineered with a level of precision that owners praised almost without reservation. Its synchromesh gearbox borrowed directly from aircraft engineering practice, its panel gaps were famously tight, and its cabin was finished to a standard that several contemporary road testers compared favorably to cars costing considerably more. Armstrong Siddeley had spent the war years building engines for Lancaster bombers and Hurricane fighters, and the company brought that same obsessive tolerance for error into a family saloon. The unexpected fact: Armstrong Siddeley's aircraft division pricing philosophy carried directly into the showroom, and nobody at the company seemed to notice the mismatch until it was far too late to correct it. The Sapphire cost more than a contemporary Jaguar Mark 7, despite the Jaguar offering a larger engine, a faster top speed, and a badge that was, by 1953, already more fashionable among younger buyers. Owners were, in effect, paying a premium for the peace of mind of aeronautical build standards on a car that did not need to fly, would never need to fly, and whose owners had, in most cases, never so much as sat in a cockpit. Precision built. Overpriced by direct comparison. The Sapphire was the car you bought when you trusted the badge, and the story behind the badge, more than you trusted the numbers on the page in front of you. Number 9. Daimler Conquest Century, 1954. Royal warrant, modest performance, a price tag that assumed nobody in the showroom would ever check either fact against the other. The Daimler Conquest Century launched in 1954 from Daimler of Coventry, a mid-sized saloon fitted with a 2.4-liter 6-cylinder engine producing 100 brake horsepower. Top speed was recorded at approximately 85 miles per hour, a figure that placed it comfortably behind several cheaper cars in the same showroom window. Daimler traded heavily and openly on its status as official supplier of motor vehicles to the royal family, a relationship stretching back decades and one the company mentioned in nearly every piece of promotional literature it produced. The Conquest Century was fitted with a distinctive fluted radiator grille that unmistakably signaled the Daimler connection to anyone who passed it in the street, and the company clearly understood that the grille itself was doing a great deal of the selling. The unexpected fact: the Conquest Century's actual performance figures were comfortably, almost embarrassingly, beaten by cheaper rivals from Jaguar and Rover, cars that cost less and did more with the same size of engine bay. Yet the Daimler commanded a noticeably higher price, a price justified purely on the strength of the Royal Association, rather than anything the engineers had achieved under the bonnet. Buyers were not, in any meaningful sense, purchasing extra horsepower, extra speed, or extra engineering sophistication. They were purchasing the right to mention Buckingham Palace at a dinner party without technically lying, at a cost that horsepower and lap times alone could never have justified on their own merits. Number 8. Alvis TC21 Grey Lady, 1953. Hand-built by a company that had never quite decided whether it made cars or family heirlooms, and priced as though it had already decided the answer was heirlooms. The Alvis TC21, nicknamed the Grey Lady by owners for its typically somber paint finish, launched in 1953 from Alvis of Coventry, a coach-built saloon powered by a 3.0-liter 6-cylinder engine producing 100 brake horsepower. Top speed was approximately 90 miles per hour. Each TC21 body was constructed almost entirely by hand, at a production rate measured in weeks rather than days, giving the finished car a genuinely bespoke quality that Alvis marketed heavily in its brochures, right down to photographs of individual craftsmen at work on individual panels. The company leaned into the idea that no two customers were buying quite the same car, and for the most part, that was true. The unexpected fact: The very hand-built construction process that justified the TC21's premium price also meant that panel gaps, trim fit, and overall cabin finish varied noticeably from one example to the next, sometimes within the same production batch. Buyers occasionally discovered, on close inspection or after a few months of ownership, that their supposedly bespoke saloon shared none of the manufacturing tolerances promised, implicitly or explicitly, in the brochure they had signed against. Bespoke, in Alvis's case, sometimes meant simply inconsistent, delivered at a price that quietly assumed consistency had been included in the deal all along. Number 7. Bristol 403, 1953. An aircraft maker's idea of a saloon car, priced as though every prospective buyer already owned a hangar, a private airstrip, and a general disregard for what things cost. The Bristol 403 launched in 1953 from Bristol Cars of Filton, a 2.0-liter straight-six saloon producing 100 brake horsepower, derived directly from Bristol's aero engine division and built on the same site where the company's aircraft were assembled. Top speed was recorded at approximately 100 miles per hour, a genuinely impressive figure for such a modest engine capacity, achieved largely through obsessive attention to aerodynamics. Bristol built the 403 in tiny numbers, with aircraft-grade attention to construction tolerances, panel fit, and drag reduction that few rival saloon makers even attempted to match. The company sold the car almost exclusively by word of mouth to existing Bristol owners, a customer base that already trusted the Mark from previous models and rarely questioned the invoice too closely. The unexpected fact: Bristol deliberately, and as a matter of stated company policy, declined to advertise the 403 in any conventional sense, reasoning internally that a car this expensive should only ever be sold to people who already understood, before they walked through the door, exactly why it was expensive. The strategy worked precisely as intended, which meant most of Britain never learned the 403 existed at all, and the small number of buyers who did pay full price were, by deliberate design, the only people ever asked to justify the figure on the check. Nobody else was even invited to have the conversation. Number 6. Lagonda 3-liter, 1953. Here it is. Number 6. A styling triumph attached to a balance sheet that never quite recovered, no matter how beautiful the car looked parked outside the Opera House. The Lagonda 3-liter launched in 1953 from Lagonda of Staines, offered as a 6-cylinder saloon and a drophead coupe, with bodywork styled by the designer Frank Feely, and powered by a 3.0-liter twin-cam engine producing 140 brake horsepower. Top speed was approximately 100 miles per hour. The 3-liter was widely regarded by contemporary road testers, and by many since, as one of the best-looking British cars of the entire decade, its proportions praised even by critics who had little else kind to say about the Mark's recent history. The unexpected fact: Lagonda's parent company, Aston Martin, had absorbed Lagonda's substantial pre-war and post-war debts years before the 3-liter ever reached production, folding a struggling company into a stronger one largely to save the name from disappearing entirely. The 3-liter's price was set deliberately high enough that company accountants hoped to recoup at least a portion of those historic losses on each individual sale. Buyers were, without ever being told so directly, and almost certainly without ever suspecting it, paying off a decade of somebody else's financial trouble, one beautifully styled saloon at a time, admiring Frank Feely's lines while unknowingly settling somebody else's overdraft. Number 5. Rover P4 75, 1950. Nicknamed the anti-Rover by people who meant it as a gentle insult, a car that Rover itself, rather remarkably, took as something close to a compliment. The Rover P4 75 launched in 1950 from Rover of Solihull, a 6-cylinder saloon powered by a 2.1-liter engine producing 75 brake horsepower. Top speed was recorded at approximately 80 miles per hour, modest even by the standards of 1950. The P4's single central fog lamp, mounted directly in the middle of the grille rather than to one side, became instantly recognizable across the country and was retained on the model for years despite widespread and fairly relentless criticism of its appearance in the motoring press. Cartoonists of the period had a genuine field day with it. The unexpected fact: Rover kept the much-mocked central fog lamp in production for years after several of the company's own internal designers reportedly recommended removing it, reasoning that the distinctive, if divisive, look justified a price bracket sitting comfortably above mechanically similar rivals that lacked the feature entirely. Owners paid extra, in effect, for a styling detail that Rover's own design department privately wanted gone. A single Cyclops eye in the middle of the grille, priced by the company as a feature, rather than quietly apologized for as a mistake that had simply gone on too long to fix. Number 4. Jaguar Mark 7, 1951. A genuinely brilliant car that still, somehow, earned itself a place on this list, if only by comparison to everything around it. The Jaguar Mark 7 launched in 1951 from Jaguar of Coventry, a large six-cylinder saloon powered by a 3.4-liter twin-cam XK engine producing 160 brake horsepower. Top speed was recorded at approximately 100 miles per hour, figures that comfortably matched or beat cars costing considerably more. The Mark 7 undercut its British luxury rivals substantially on price, while matching or beating their performance outright, a fact that Jaguar's founder, William Lyons, repeated at every opportunity, in every advertisement, and to every journalist who would listen. It was not false modesty. The numbers genuinely supported him. The unexpected fact, despite being, by a wide margin, the best value car anywhere on this entire list, the Mark VII's runaway commercial success embarrassed several of its costlier rivals so badly that at least two competing manufacturers privately adjusted their own pricing structures within roughly a year of its launch, effectively conceding, without ever saying so publicly, that their previous prices had been set with profit margin in mind far more than engineering cost. The Mark 7 didn't overprice itself for a moment. It simply exposed, rather bluntly, everyone else on this list who had. Number 3. Bentley R-Type Continental, 1952. The fastest four-seater car in the world at the moment of its launch, and priced, quite deliberately, to make absolutely certain you knew it. The Bentley R-Type Continental launched in 1952 from Bentley of Crewe, a coach-built Grand Tourer powered by a 4.6-liter straight-six engine producing an estimated 150 brake horsepower. Top speed was recorded at approximately 120 miles per hour, extraordinary for a full four-seat car in 1952. The Continental's aerodynamic fastback body, built by the coach builder H.J. Mulliner, was a genuine engineering achievement in its own right, refined in wind tunnel testing and shaped specifically to reduce drag rather than simply to look elegant, though it managed both at once rather effortlessly. The unexpected fact, the R-Type Continental cost roughly double the price of a standard Bentley R-Type saloon, and more, in many documented cases, than a comfortable detached house in the home counties at the time, for a car that shared its chassis, and a great deal of its underlying mechanical specification, with a far cheaper standard model sitting on the same showroom floor. Buyers were paying an enormous premium almost entirely for the aerodynamic bodywork and the accompanying bragging rights, both of which were entirely real, and neither of which came cheap under any circumstances. Number 2. Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith, 1950s long wheelbase. They took Britain's single most respected badge and quietly stretched the price along with the wheelbase, and nobody outside the factory gates seemed to fully appreciate how far it had stretched until the final invoice landed. The Rolls-Royce Silver Wraith continued in production throughout the 1950s from Rolls-Royce of Crewe, a coach-built limousine powered by a 4.6 to 4.9-liter straight-six engine producing an estimated 150 brake horsepower. Top speed was recorded at approximately 90 miles per hour, entirely beside the point for a car built primarily to be driven in, not to be driven quickly. The Silver Wraith was sold, unusually, as a rolling chassis to independent coach builders around the country, meaning no two finished cars were ever quite identical, and buyers effectively commissioned their own bodywork as a separate, parallel project running alongside the purchase of the chassis itself, often through entirely different firms. The unexpected fact, because the chassis and the coachwork were priced and commissioned entirely separately, from separate companies with separate invoices, the final total cost of a completed Silver Wraith was frequently double, and sometimes more than double, the initial chassis price quoted in early conversations with the factory. More than one buyer reportedly discovered the true, final total only after the coach building work was already well underway, at which point walking away was rarely a practical option. The most respected badge in Britain, sold, quite literally, with the most elastic price tag in Britain. Number 1. Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud, 1955. And here we are. Number 1. The most overpriced British luxury car of the entire decade. Not because it disappointed anyone mechanically, and by every honest account of the period it did not disappoint a single owner in that respect, but because it was, by any fair and honest measure of engineering against cost, overpriced for exactly what it delivered on paper, and nearly everybody who bought one seemed to know it perfectly well, and bought one anyway without hesitation. The Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud launched in 1955 from Rolls-Royce of Crewe, a full-size luxury saloon powered by a 4.9-liter straight-six engine producing an estimated 178 brake horsepower. Top speed was recorded at approximately 100 miles per hour, a perfectly ordinary figure for the price bracket it occupied, and one that several considerably cheaper cars on this very list had already matched or comfortably beaten years earlier. The Silver Cloud was engineered, from the very first sketch, to be silent, smooth, and dignified above every other consideration, and by every contemporary account it succeeded completely, gliding rather than driving in any conventional sense, and asking almost nothing of its owner except patience with performance figures that were, frankly, modest for the money involved. The unexpected fact: for the price of a single Silver Cloud, a buyer in 1955 could instead have purchased a Jaguar Mark 7 offering broadly comparable performance, with a smaller, considerably faster sports saloon left over in the change, or a Bentley R-Type Continental carrying a genuine, verified claim to being the fastest four-seater car anywhere on Earth at that moment. The Silver Cloud outsold neither of them on raw engineering merit, not by any honest comparison of horsepower, speed, or cost per mile. It outsold on mystique alone, on the simple, stubborn fact that the radiator grille said Rolls-Royce, and the price tag said so too, and enough buyers in 1955 quietly decided between themselves that mystique alone was worth the difference, whatever the accountants might privately think. Silent, smooth, dignified, and, by the plain numbers sitting right there on the specification sheet, the single most overpriced car anywhere on this entire list. In our view, the Cloud sits at number 1 not because it ever failed to deliver comfort, refinement, or prestige, all of which it delivered in full. It sits here because it delivered precisely what it promised on the tin, and then quietly, confidently, charged for a great deal more than that. The 1950s believed, with real conviction, that a badge alone could carry a price entirely on its own merits, and very often it genuinely could, at least in the eyes of the people writing the checks. The cars on this list were expensive in quite different ways from one another, some in raw materials, some in pure mystique, some simply in the arithmetic that nobody in the showroom ever thought to check carefully until the final invoice arrived on the doormat. Overpriced, in the end, is really nothing more complicated than the gap between what a badge promises a buyer, in that first glance across the showroom floor, and what the engine underneath it actually, honestly, delivers once the car is out on the road. Britain closed that particular gap eventually, though not for decades yet to come, and certainly not before several more badges learned the same expensive lesson. The cars on this list were the education, paid for, quite literally, by the buyers who could afford to learn it. If this kind of thing is your idea of a good time, watching Britain's wealthiest citizens quietly overpay for beautifully finished metal, do subscribe, because there is a great deal more of this coming, and you will not want to miss the next list. Which of these would you still pay full price for today? And did the Silver Cloud deserve the top spot? Tell us below.